Okay, and welcome to Morbid Movies with Dom and Marion. Dom, I've got a question for you.
Go for it.
All right, do you know the way to Shell Beach?
What?
Did you watch the movie before we did this?
Yeah, no. Uh,
You're off to a good start. Okay, so today we are going to be talking about the 1998 cult film Dark City.
I'm very
Um,
excited about it.
yeah, that's a good one. That's one that I think we watched that back when we first met each other a million years ago.
Yes, I
Oh,
was remembering that pre-recording. We watched it together. You introduced me to a bunch of films that I'd never heard of at all before, including Hedwig, but
hmm.
also Dark City, and it blew my mind.
Yeah,
And
it's a good one, and it's really like an unsung like film of that era because it was overshadowed so heavily by The Matrix, like so many other sci-fi films that came out in that era.
Yeah, but
So,
it predates it as well. This is obviously what
mhm.
I think a lot of people are now rediscovering Dark City Mary because it was the Matrix before the Matrix was cool. You
Right.
know,
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely The Matrix owes quite a bit to it as well because of, not just it's like so much of the crew from both were filmed in Australia and the I think roughly the same location. It's a lot of the same crew, a lot of the same set pieces were used because Dark City sold their sets, many of the pieces to the Matrix, like the rooftop you see in the Matrix chase, you also see that same rooftop in Dark City with the main character John Murdoch when he's being chased across it. It's a great roof to get chased across, I guess.
yeah, absolutely. I think the aesthetic as well. It stands up now. Obviously,
Mhm.
it has that reputation as kind of a cyberpunk and goth, goth sort of style film, which has become very
It does.
trendy again.
It's interesting too because it's the film really blends that. Is of course the director. It's Alex Proyas,
Proyas.
who directed the Crow and then later I, Robot, and he's very good at that kind of atmosphere. But they really did a great job of blending not just that kind of cyber gothic aesthetic, which they used more in like the underworld where the strangers lived, but also in the above world. It's like that dark noir kind of 40s, 50s. You're not quite sure when it's happening thing, which is like in its own way very compatible with that goth aesthetic too.
Yeah, it's an excellent point you make, and I think that that's why it appealed to so many people alongside The Crow. Obviously, Proyas, hit the sort of 1-2 punch with The Crow, and also this film. I think it spoke to people like us, who were grew up in the goth scene and were fascinated by kind of dark alternative culture, and the way it was done, the way it was shot as well, just had so much there was so much vision in it, and I think a lot of people are now encouraging people to go back to watch this, even though I think it was considered a box office bomb, really,
Yeah,
in
it
terms.
really, I think if I remember, because I know the budget was 27 million, I think it only made 27.2 million. So it
Yeah,
was a barely break even movie. And I know that's Hollywood math, which is, designed to look worse, but it really just I remember at the time I saw, the posters for it and was really wanted to see it, but nobody talked about it. Nobody seemed to actually like see the film, which is too bad because it's fantastic.
yeah. The other thing I think people need to realize is there is a director's cut out there, which
Hmm.
doesn't spoil the movie in the first few minutes.
Yeah, I didn't have time to order a copy. It's on my wish list, but I didn't have time to get a copy before this because I think about having read in the production how the New Line Cinema insisted on having that beginning narration by Kiefer Sutherland that explains the entire plot of the film and thinking about, the I wish I could watch it for the first time without that so I could actually have the story unfold in front of me the way it was meant to because it's still a great movie in the theatrical cut, but I do think that would have been a much more powerful experience, like probably on par with the reveal in Fight Club the first time you watch it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's so many cool details in this, which we'll obviously touch on, which
Mhm,
I actually found out through your research into the film before we started recording this
mhm.
podcast. But one of the coolest things I think about this is that Rufus Sewell was relatively unknown. They wanted to have your actors of the time, your Johnny Depps. I think also
Tom Cruise was also considered briefly, I believe, but yeah, they decided that for a man you're not supposed to recognize who has amnesia, it doesn't make sense because, and I think it's true. It's most of the time when I watch a film and someone like Tom Cruise or Johnny Depp is in it, I'm watching Tom Cruise or Johnny Depp, and it's like you don't forget that because they're just such huge names and have been for so long. And even back, this was what, 1998. I mean, Johnny Depp, I feel like wasn't at the height of his powers, but he was still pretty huge in 98, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, you'd be right. Absolutely. And I think it was a great launching pad for Rufus Sewell, who went on to have a great career as well. Numerous other actors in the film also launched their
Oh,
careers.
yes, I think Jennifer
Jennifer,
Connelly, like she had already done a few things. Like obviously Labyrinth had happened. I think what, about a decade, give or take, before that. But that was really helpful to getting her further. I think honestly, you could argue Kiefer Sutherland to that point had been pretty well typecast into characters similar to what he'd been in, Stand By Me or The Lost Boys, and that was such a huge departure for him that he even thought the script had been sent to him by mistake and was meant for his father, Donald Sutherland,
yeah,
who,
yeah.
I could have honestly seen in that role doing a wonderful job as well. But I'm glad that they had chosen Kiefer Sutherland because just he did such a great job
Yeah,
in that
yeah, and
role.
I agree, and I would argue it's a role we've never seen Kiefer Sutherland repeat since. This kind of confused, stuttering,
Right. So I think after that, he spent so much time doing 24, the series, and part of that's a whole other can of worms. But I'll be honest, I don't haven't kept up with his career. I'm not sure what he's been up to since then as an actor.
well,
But
he's done a few things, but he's also a folk musician.
is he really? I did not
Yes,
know that.
yes.
It's like his early work looms so large because I grew up watching The Lost Boys and Dark City and Stand By Me. Like, those were movies I loved. So it's just like that's really where he is in my head always. But
Yeah, of course.
yeah.
I've got again Lost Boys, another cult goth film, which we might do here on Morbid
We
Movies. Yeah,
should. That's one of my favorites. Like, I know it's probably overdone, but I love it too much.
absolutely. We should do it anyway. We should
Yeah.
do it
I
anyway.
just
Go on.
returning back to Dark City, not to get too on a tangent though, it's like the cast is great because there's some other like more established actors that bring well. I mean, Richard O'Brien as Mr. Hand was just great too, as Rocky Horror Picture Show. You can't go
Mm,
wrong. As he's
absolutely.
just perfect. And I know that role, Mr. Hand, was written for him because Proyas thought to himself, like, pale, androgynous, skinny guy. He played that character already when he was
Y-
Riff Raff. And, it's Richardson is also just a great get because, like, he's a legend, let's be honest.
yeah, you're right. Exactly as you say, the cast was really, really well thought out here, and I think a lot of really standout performances from a lot of people. In retrospect, I think if you go back to this now, you can see just how good Kiefer Sutherland is in this, just how good the other performers are. I think particularly like we say. There are so many great examples in Dark
Hmm.
City of just quality performances. Rufus Sewell, again, as we've
Oh,
mentioned.
incredible. And he's one of my favorites too. I just love everything I see him in,
Yeah,
so I'm
just
just
go on. Yeah.
and I'm just glad he got the launching pad, honestly, because it led to so many things. I don't know if you've watched Man in the High Castle.
I've heard
Um,
so many good things. I do need to watch it.
it can be a hard watch because it's a very heavy topic, but his performance in that is just absolutely astounding because that's not an easy role he played, and he brought a lot to it, I thought. So,
Mm, mm.
and it's just so many of the things. It's like he's a great actor. He might have found his way anyway, but I'm just, I think this did play such a huge role in letting him show what he was capable of.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I just think his look and the vibe, and again the way the clothes were pulled together, the way the set design was pulled together. Again,
Mhm.
the overall aesthetic of the film across the board was again very of its time. very,
Oh,
very of its
oh,
time.
absolutely.
But that's, I mean, that's why me and you are here because we love that time and we're probably still stuck
It's
in
a
it.
beautiful aesthetic, and I'll be honest, I think it had a heavy influence on, I would have to check dates to be sure, but I look at like especially the final like battle scene of that movie, like how everything looks, and there are so many music videos that I am absolutely sure drew from what they did visually in that film because I look at it and I said, this looks like that the last probably 20 minutes of that film could be a Nine Inch Nails music video.
I,
You know
I,
what I mean?
Absolutely, absolutely, and you've hit the nail on the head. I'd love to do something on that actually, something quirky, maybe for the future of this podcast, music videos influenced by Dark City, I think would be an excellent
Yeah,
episode to do.
I would have to do more digging because I didn't see any direct references, but I was kind of keeping it mostly narrowly to Dark City and not branching out too much. But
Probably good, probably good.
you know,
It's good you keep me on track with my heavily
yeah. Oh,
neurodivergent brain.
I've got rabbit holes to go down. I watched the old trailer for the film this morning just get in the mindset. And I'm listening to it, and whatever the backing song they used for it, it's like some kind of electronic thing. I have to keep digging because I was trying to find out what song it was this morning because it's really cool, and I have yet to figure it out.
So
So.
I was reading I was watching some other reviews and they mentioned that song too. So clearly it kicks ass.
Yeah,
So
you'll have to if you go on like IMDb, the trailer at the top is the old one that has the song, and I was surprised too because it's 1998. When I clicked the trailer, I expected it to be that guy going like "in a world," kind of a thing, and it was just shots of the movie with really cool music. It was a whole vibe. I'm willing to bet at the time that style of marketing, which is very common trailer marketing now. I thought it was a new trailer and had to look it up. Actually, back then you didn't see trailers do that. They always explained it to people, and I wonder if that played a role in why people didn't turn up for the film because it's ahead of its time as a trailer style, which is sort of nonsense to say, but
no, it's an interesting point again, that sort of immersive style. I think it is. You're saying it's ahead of its time, Mary, and I think maybe we're just looking at it with rose tinted, heavily goth glasses. But I do think that the film is ahead of its time, and I do think people go back now and like we said in the beginning, they're super excited by this film now,
Mhm. Yeah,
but they
it's
nobody was then. Nobody was then.
no, it's funny too because I always do this thing to myself where I go to, I don't know if you've ever used the Letterboxd app
Yeah.
for films. I always do this thing where I go on there and I look at my favorite film and I look at the reviews and take massive psychic damage because people who review on Letterboxd are cruel
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
they give good masterpiece movies 2 stars. So I'm just on there watching people eviscerate my favorite movie and and it's one of those things where it's like I think that online reviews can be too harsh, but sometimes they do have a point, so I do try to kind of look at the discussion, but it makes you forget like when you read those reviews, oh yeah, people do actually like this film.
yeah. I mean, what would you give it if I was going to ask you now, like a star rating? I know that's a
Oh, on
very
a like are we doing 0 to 5 or 0 to 10 or
let's do 0 to 5 just to keep it simple.
Oh, I mean, I'm so biased. I love this movie. I grew up with it, so I've got that Stockholm syndrome of childhood too. But like honestly, I would probably give it 4.5, 5 stars. I don't think there's much I would change about that film,
Yeah,
other than obviously with the theatrical cut, I do have a bone to pick with that beginning
yeah,
narration because it does just kill so much of the reveal of that film.
yeah, yeah. Absolutely. Again, I've heard so many things about the director's cut, so I would encourage anybody that happens upon this to watch that first.
Oh, for sure.
Before we kind of round up with some of the research you've done, there's some really in-depth sort of things that I hadn't picked up on before you'd kind of brought them to my attention in your research. Do you think, Mary, that the Matrix would have existed without Dark City? Is it as black and white as that kind of question?
I mean, that's a hard one. I don't think it would exist in the same way. I mean, because like I know I'm not really sure on the timeline on The Matrix because I didn't get that far into my research, but films take years to make and they're only a year apart, which means that The Matrix would have in some form been into production probably before then. I mean, and then some of it's just there was something in the air because in addition to The Matrix and Dark City, you also have all right, the Cronenberg film. I don't know if it's pronounced existence or existence because I heard someone say existence in a video and I've been saying existence for 20 yeyears. So I'm having an existential tri crisis right now.
You're
But
so cool,
oh,
Mary.
so cool.
Existence. Yeah.
I mean, and that, it's like there were a lot of other films that aren't exactly the same, but I would say have some of the similar themes. Like you could even draw a parallel to Fight Club came out around the same time. There is this sort of a lot of it's just a reaction to that 90s end of history, burgeoning technology. We're all trapped in an office doing fake jobs kind of thing that it would have really been, I think these would mostly be people who would have been Gen X, like the generation roughly ahead of us. This is the things they're going through where they're really experiencing, is this really what life is now? And I think every generation has a version of that when you go and get a real job where you're like, oh, this sucks. But
Yeah.
that was, I mean, it's like even to a lesser degree, a film like Office Space occupies that same mindset of like, we're all trapped in a maze
Yeah.
doing these jobs we hate. Is this really all that we're destined for? But on the really cool end of it, you get those sci-fi movies like that. I just, I think that the visual language in The Matrix would have been different. And obviously, since they directly use some of the set pieces, a lot
Yeah.
of how that film looked would be different. And you do notice things like The Matrix is famous for bullet time, and it has a very similar look because it's the same special effects people, a lot of them. But when you look at like at the end when they have their sort of showdown, the kind of waves they use as a special effect to show that something's happening, that it's like a psychic battle in Dark City, has a very similar sort of rippling look to it as like when the bullets fly by Neo in The Matrix. There's a lot of overlap in the visual language. So I think that you can't separate the two completely, but I think in some form The Matrix probably would have happened anyway because that was just in the air at the time.
Mm, mm. Yeah, I think you're right. Do you think there's another film or a set of films since? Is there anything that you've seen in more recent times that you would compare? Obviously, that's a can of worms that we could probably leave to the potential listener in
Uh,
terms of
do you mean
comparisons
like
to go on.
thematically or just visually or both? Like, what are
Oh,
we?
yeah. Oh, like thematically, visually, anything that's kind of, you know, made you think of Dark City, giving you that same feeling, that same.
It's hard because I think that there's things from that era that give me a similar vibe, but I feel like the culture in a way moved on so quickly because, in like the late 90s, we're getting those Matrix Dark City movies, and it's only a matter of what, like maybe, you know, 5, 10 years, we're getting those very blue tinted, like Twilight, Pride and Prejudice, and zombie kind of movies where we've sort of the culture, I feel like, at least, what your goth types are going to be, it moved more into like a gothic romance almost kind of
Mm,
genre,
mm,
unless we moved away from cyberpunk. And I think some of that probably has to do with the fact that by then 98, 99, we were all just getting on the internet, and so that new technology, that interconnectedness, we'd begun to take it for granted,
mm.
a good 10 years later when we start seeing that other genre. So I think so much of it just is a window into that specific period of time.
Yeah.
And I'm buying time because I'm trying to think of if there's nothing
No,
springing to mind. So I think that is the answer. Is probably what it is.
absolutely, absolutely. And I thought I would encourage any listeners to feedback as well. I think it's an interesting conversation to have. What about kind of the themes in Dark City as being present today? I've seen some people, some articles, some videos say that it's applicable today because we're obsessed with, creating a better world. We're obsessed with having more things and being better and understanding ourselves more. And that search for constant betterment can be exhausting and
Mhm.
can be a real challenge for us, I think. So in terms of the themes that are still present today, or relative points for anybody just picking up Dark City, do you think there are any parallels in terms of the themes that can apply today?
Oh, I mean, absolutely. If anything, I think that the things that people were worried about at the time that spawned these kind of movies have only compounded today. We're all even more online. We're more in our bubbles. It's technology's more integrated into our life. And, it's you get a real sense that a lot of people just feel really trapped into the roles that they're in because, life is hard and you gotta like just kind of go through the motions of survival. So, and I think this is like the beauty of dystopian fiction is you're writing about a future based on what you see happening today and where it's likely to go. So if it's well written, it tends to remain relevant for quite some time because humanity's not that good at overcoming our issues at the end of the day. So
No. Yeah. You're right, and again, it goes to a much deeper conversation. And I will circle back to Dark City because I think there are some wonderful themes and ideas that you touched upon in your research that I want to call upon, particularly some of the stuff around. Was it Dante's Inferno? I do apologize. I did.
no, it wasn't Dante's Inferno this time. I think it's Allegory of the Cave, which is
There you go.
Plato.
That's
I
the
wrote about
one.
that in 5 minute hypothesis in the notes. So that's probably what you're thinking of.
There you
But
go. That's it. Yeah. So tell me about your research into that and how you, because I didn't know that. Maybe I should have dug a little deeper in my own research. But when did you pick that up and tell people, well, tell me more
absolutely.
about
Well,
it.
like every serious, researcher looking into a film, went straight to IMDb and started looking at what everybody else already said. So someone just had mentioned it, had mentioned in passing that it seemed to deal with allegory of the cave, and they had said last Thursdayism, but I disagree and think 5 minute hypothesis. We'll get into that in a minute if we have time. But I really just then I went to Wikipedia because I'm not that good at philosophy, remembering these things. And I found it interesting because I think it's correct. So I'll give a quick breakdown of what Allegory of the Cave is. It's something Plato wrote about. And just to sort of briefly explain, is the idea is you have people who've spent their lives chained in a cave facing a blank wall, and that is, their heads are affixed is the idea. So that's all they can see. So there's people who are supposed to be, there's like people moving around behind them in a fire that cast shadows. So their entire perception of the world is not as it is, it's the shadows that have been cast on the wall. And this whole idea is just supposed to represent the idea that we only understand reality in so much as we can perceive that, and that's probably not an accurate picture. And it definitely relates in Dark City because you've got people who live in this little city that's isolated. And I mean, even just in a literal sense, it's always night there, it's dark, so they are just looking at shadows by, it's this reality is not real. It's just what they've been led to believe based on what they are able to perceive in their surroundings. And of course, in Dark City, that has been heavily manipulated in the same way that, someone who's chained to a wall. So I
Absolutely.
found that interesting. And then it's the other one I had written down was the 5 minute hypothesis, which is Bertrand Russell put forth. And the idea of that is that if the universe sprang into existence 5 minutes ago from nothing, with all of your past memories and all signs of history included, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference between that and that history having taken place, which ties in pretty clearly to, the occupants of Dark City are running on memories that aren't truly their own. So I had flagged both of those as concepts that fed into the film. I had seen folks referencing Last Thursdayism, which would be similar, but Last Thursdayism is sort of the same thing as the 5 minute hypothesis, but applied to justifying how historical evidence doesn't line up with a literal interpretation of the Bible. So I felt that was less applicable since there's, other than talking about the human soul, not a lot of like religious discussion in the film proper.
Mm.
So I guess the argument could be made, but I wouldn't think that that was as heavy of an influence as 5 minute hypothesis in that
Yeah.
general realm.
Yeah. Like you say, the inhabitants, the reality is warped by these, I guess you would say, villains in the film,
Hmm.
the strangers, Mary. And I've heard numerous people talk about the strangers as a group. And some people feel sorry for them. Of course, it begins because their world has been destroyed, or it's at risk of being destroyed rather. And of course, they want to understand human individuality, as they believe that is the key to remaining in existence.
Right.
Do you feel sorry for the strangers in this film? Because again, they are, they are they don't appear intelligent at first, but a few of them, as we mentioned a couple of the actors earlier, a few of them learn. They appear to be learning. They appear to be growing. But there is some sympathy across the online community for the strangers, Mary. I wonder how you feel about them as characters.
They definitely, I mean, and they were intended to be. They are what I would call tragic villains because what they're doing, at least from a human perspective, is, it's morally wrong. You're playing with people's lives in a very literal sense, and in some cases, very intentionally, getting people killed for this experiment, and so there's this one, I think it's interesting because when I watch this, it's like they're doing it for their survival. So there's a certain amount of sympathy. And then it's like I start to think about all the things that, we as people do. So, we do quite a bit of medical experimentation and things like that, not just on people, but on animals. And there are huge ethical questions there. So it's like one of those things where it's like, I have to kind of feel sorry for them in some ways because in a very real way to a lot of other creatures, like we are the strangers.
Yeah.
So and I think that's definitely an intentional theme because there is that scene where you see Dr. Schreber pushing the rat through the maze. So I think they were cognizant of that in the writing as well, of course. But at the same time, there's only so sorry you can feel for them because it's like, well, it's understandable the why they still are going about it all wrong and ultimately aren't successful very
Mm.
much, I think, as a result of that. So it's just an interesting moral quandary at the end of the day, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. I agree, and I think those moral quandaries, as you put it, again, can still be asked today. And I do think it's an interesting film to focus on, which is why we've chosen it for the first episode. Mary, why are we here with Morbid Movies, and why are we focusing on Dark City for our first episode? What was the appeal for you? Obviously, again, we watched it together many many years ago, around sort of 2000. We were talking about this off record, 2005, and we kind of bonded over the film
Mhm.
and its aesthetic. And I actually bonded with numerous people in the US over this film while studying film. Why have we chosen Dark City to launch Morbid Movies with?
I mean, I think a lot of it, is as you discussed that, I know for a fact it's a film that we both love and we're both familiar with, so it makes an easy jumping off point. But I mean, for me as well personally, it's one of my favorite films, and it's far enough back that I think it's one of those films that really like shaped my taste because I watched that and I went, oh yeah, hell yeah, I want more of that. And unfortunately, there's not too much more of that particular type of film out there. But it's just that whole aesthetic world really opened up to me. And I also love it too because it's like in addition to those cyberpunk goth aesthetics, I love noir films so much, and I watch a lot of those old films. So seeing that kind of aesthetic integrated so beautifully is huge. And it's not even actually a terribly long film. There's a lot to really sink your teeth into because yeah, it's an hour and 40 minutes, which by today's standards is pretty short since I feel like everything's 3.5 hours these days. So it's, they managed to pack so much into that film to really ponder. There's just and I appreciate that, for the most part, outside of that intro in the theatrical cut, you don't have the world spoon-fed to you. There's so many things that it's like you see, it's like, well, they're doing this, but you don't really know the ins and outs of how everything there works. You have so much to think about. Like I think so much about like the people you see who are living their lives in that world who aren't part of the main
Mm,
story. It's like what is life like for all of these other people who are a different person, day to day,
yeah, yeah,
and what that absolutely will do to a person because it's you get the sense from that film that on some level, at least some of the people can feel that they're not in the right place, but they don't know why. So,
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's another a wider conversation around identity. It can play quite a role today with gender, with identity. People not feeling in the right place, in the right space, in the right body,
mhm.
even. So I think there is a wider conversation to be had, which maybe we'll pick up on. Before we round up, Mary, with what people can expect from Morbid Movies as we continue this, I have a deeper, wider cultural question around sort of again, I say our culture, but we're talking like goth culture, alternative culture, the kind of people that we are and the kind of people that enjoy a movie like Dark City. Do we rely too heavily on nostalgia? As you mentioned before we started recording, obviously you and I still listen to music that's 20 years old and think it's, fairly fresh, and people they've just tragically remade The Crow, which maybe we'll talk about
Like,
that.
no, they didn't. That
Yeah,
didn't happen.
yeah. We maybe we'll talk about that in another episode. But yeah, like I wonder, because Dark City has become a cult classic. It was not. It is now.
Hmm.
Um, and there are enough people reviewing it to this very day as if it had just come out. Do we as a culture, and I'm talking again about goth alternative culture, do we have an issue with nostalgia? Do we have an issue with going back to the good old days of, again, you 1994s, those early 90s films, and kind of trying to um yeah, rely too heavily on nostalgia? Do you think that's I don't know. Is it right to call it a cultural issue? Perhaps not. But is it an issue for people that are into alternative music, alternative film? Do we just refuse to embrace, stuff in the 2024s, and are we stuck in 1994 rather?
I do make an effort to try to, keep up on, new things and keep that which I like and discard the rest. I think it's hard to when you're in a subculture because it's, we're less of a monoculture than we used to be, obviously, but there's only so many things that appeal to goth people coming out at any given time. And, and we've got quite a few decades behind us to pick and choose from, which helps now. But, I don't see on a year-to-year basis. You'll have a few movies that seem kind of like they've got goth vibes, but it's not the prevailing culture. I think you kind of, if you want to have enough things to keep you entertained, you do need to reach back. But, I'm definitely open to new things, and I have my eye on a few projects that haven't come to fruition yet that I think might be perfect for us going forward too. So I'm definitely keeping an eye on recent developments.
Excellent.
As far as it goes, I only think it's a problem if you get to that point where it's like, a lot of my people of my parents' generation were like this, or it's like, oh, kids these days don't know, like there hasn't been a good song made since like 1979 kind of thing. It's like I don't want to get stagnant because it's wonderful to live in a time period where it's like I have access pretty easily thanks to the internet to all of the artwork that came before and I still have the ability to enjoy new stuff. That's like the best place that you can be. There's everything available to me, but it's the danger absolutely is just if you get stuck in that real goths only listen to, The
Yeah,
Cure or something like that. It's like you love those things, but it's just don't get caught up in the labels of the subculture and become a purist is I guess my thought process.
yeah, absolutely a gatekeeper, and
Hmm.
there will be no gatekeeping on Morbid Movies. We welcome
Absolutely not.
we welcome everybody. And in terms of the future, which will to round up now, what can people expect, Mary, from what we'll be doing here at Morbid Movies? What do you hope for the future, and what can people expect?
Well, I hope that we can keep going and keep talking about the movies we love, and maybe I'll even be able to introduce you to a few more things you haven't seen, because you know me, I'm always looking for something new to horrify you with. But I'm also hoping, as we build an audience, maybe we'll start hearing from folks who have suggestions for films that I haven't seen either or heard of, and it would be lovely if we could actually start to get in touch with some filmmakers, especially smaller indie filmmakers who are working in this space, because I would love to promote more new
Mm.
material because more is always better, even if it's not something that's, maybe you or my cup of tea, maybe one of the listeners will love it. And it would be great to just share more spooky goth goodness with the world.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. So we'll be doing goth stuff. We'll be broadening out into the wider alternative genres as well. So yeah, any indie films that you think we should check out now or in the future, if you come back to this at some point, do let us know. We will continue to do this as long as we want because
And
uh,
we'll have to eventually get set up with someplace people can actually communicate this to.
indeed, yeah, we should probably get on that. We'll,
Yeah, as I think you said, we're gonna be having a YouTube
that's
channel
right.
up, so people will be able to drop comments there, but we'll have to look into getting a little more accessible if we want audience
Yeah,
participation.
you're right. Probably should have thought about this before we started the episode, but yeah, maybe you're on Blue Sky. Maybe yeah, you get us a Blue Sky account, Mary. There you go.
Yeah, I can get us a Blue Sky account and run that. I'm definitely capable. So what we can do is we'll say episode 2. We'll
Yeah,
circle back and we'll drop our actual communication. And when we get it done, we can always add that to the show notes as well once we get our act together.
absolutely, absolutely. Well, anybody that happens upon this again now or in the future, thank you very much for listening. This has been Morbid Movies
Absolutely.
with Dom and Mary. Anything you'd like to finish on, Mary?
I just say if you haven't seen Dark City already, absolutely go out and watch that. And if you can get a hold of that director's cut, because it is going to be a much cooler experience for you. I think we did a pretty good job of avoiding any major spoilers. So hopefully we haven't ruined the movie for anybody who hasn't seen it yet. But definitely do check that out and do stay tuned for our next episode because we will be back with another awesome goth movie.
Awesome. See you guys soon.
All right, bye.
Bye.